kind of bike.
Yeah.
And then do the Peloton
the app
program. Like the app is like $13 a month or something. So
that's what we splurged and got a Peloton back in November.
Nice.
So I'm now part of that prestigious, annoying,
I get it.
Coastal elite family. Yeah,
it is. It's kind of a cult in the mentality, but I get it because it hooks up your brain reward centers to exercise, which is something I've never been able to do in my life. So
that's awesome. That's great.
At 45, I'm trying to extend my lifespan at least a little bit.
Yeah. Man.
All right, folks. You see, you get a little behind the scenes talk there. So let's go ahead and go live. We are back for our next installment. Before we go forward, we've got to look back at the 2020 season while everything's still fresh in our head before cumulative stats and rankings start to blur all of the detail that we have. And very lucky, and it's going to be a cathartic session here between two Yinzers as we look at the AFC North. Before we get into that, got to remind you, because it's the playoffs, there's a celebration. All new players at DraftKings can play for free for the $1 million top prize with your first deposit, thanks to our partnership with DraftKings. Create your DraftKings DFS account, make a deposit. DraftKings will credit your account with a free contest entry. Then draft your lineup, compete for millions in prizes. Just go to dkng.co/FBGMillie to play. That's dkng.co/FBGMillie. Act quickly. This offer ends after the playoffs. Minimum $5 deposit. Eligibility restrictions apply, and see DraftKings.com for details. Let's get into the details here, JJ. No, we're not going to, I do this alphabetically, so we'll save the worst for last, the best for last. I don't know.
Yeah.
But let's start with Baltimore, because certainly folks that were predicting regression, this offense isn't going to be as efficient. This offense isn't going to create the overachieving players, especially Lamar Jackson, that it did in the past. That was the right move, the smart move here. But Lamar Jackson, against the easier schedule in December, started to look more like Lamar Jackson that we remembered and loved. You might get him outside of the top 5 quarterbacks next year. Would that interest you? And what did you think of his performance this season?
Yeah, so, the quarterback discussion I think is really interesting. I did an episode of the Late Round Podcast this past week talking about the importance of the rushing component at the position in fantasy football now. And what's interesting about it is not so, we knew that it was important going into the season. We knew that it's been important for years now. But the difference now is that ADP reflects that, and that it's becoming more predictable, the quarterback position is, than it has been in the past. I mean, in the past, if you looked at the correlation between ADP versus end of season result among top 12 quarterbacks, there was almost no correlation year over year, which means that, you could just throw darts and you could see maybe I'll get the QB1 this year. But now, starting last year, and it was something that I noted in an article that I did, but starting last year, you saw a more efficient market at the quarterback position. So what that means is until we get a player pool, a quarterback pool that's just filled with these mobile quarterbacks and these dual threat quarterbacks, which we're not quite there yet. There's going to be an influx coming in this year that, we have more mobility at the quarterback position, and we're going to see more and more of that just given the way the game has evolved. But this year and in the short term, it's going to cause you, or should cause you, to want to spend at least a little bit more on the quarterback position. It's a logical thing to do, right? And honestly, it was a logical thing to do this past year because of the way the market shifted. Back when I wrote the late round quarterback ebook in 2011, 2012, when that came out, when quarterbacks were being drafted so early, that the QB 12 was being drafted in round 8. Last year, the QB 6 was being drafted in round 8 because people were just drafting them later and later. And at that point in time, it's like, sure, yeah, you can get Josh Allen if you want to. That's fine. It's not a big deal. The opportunity cost isn't very high. It's going to be interesting how the ADP sort of works its way through the offseason and what it looks like entering next year. But as a result of that, if Lamar Jackson, given he's one of the few quarterbacks or one of the handful of quarterbacks that you're going to get that rushing juice from, if he does slip, for instance, if someone's drafting Aaron Rodgers over Lamar Jackson, I'm taking Lamar Jackson all day long because we know that Aaron Rodgers is getting the majority of his points through the air, and he's going to regress because he's not going to have this insane touchdown rate again next year. And so as a result, it's very easy to fade that kind of player. It's not very easy to fade rushing quarterbacks anymore. No. It's not easy. So yeah, with Lamar Jackson, regression was inevitable this year. He went from a 9% touchdown rate to a 6.9% touchdown rate, which was still pretty nice, pretty good. But basically every mark through the air for Lamar Jackson just got a little bit worse. That's what it looked like. I mean, that's what we saw visually, and that's what it showed in the stat sheet too. And then, he didn't run as much, but he was still fairly effective on the ground. He did see positive regression when it comes to rushing touchdowns, which was good to see. But like you noted, down the stretch, they get that really cake schedule. And we finally saw a little bit more magic too between him and Hollywood Brown, which was completely missing throughout the first half of the season.
Yeah, I think that he lost confidence in the play calling. We saw Greg Roman maybe not stay a step ahead in the same way we saw Sean McVay not stay a step ahead, but he had his confidence back. He got that big playoff win. And I don't care whether it's actually true or not, JJ. I like to think that he had a bowel movement in that Browns game.
100%, yes.
And he left that stuff in the toilet. It's time to move on. Right? It's elimination, right? And certainly, let's put it this way. I'll be rooting for the quarterback that wins in the Baltimore-Buffalo game. Like, I'll just be rooting, and I'm specifically saying the quarterback, the team too, but the quarterback to make their first Super Bowl. I'm discounting the opportunity that Cleveland might have to win, but we're actually going to talk about Cleveland a little bit later. Otherwise, on this team, and I love you anticipated one of my questions, JJ, that what's the state of late round quarterback as we head into the 2021 season. And I love it because JJ, you're experiencing, I like how you even harken back to the beginnings, because you're experiencing the arc of any influencer, especially in American culture, where you're successful, but then you're too successful. You say, hey, that doesn't mean in all cases, all the time, forever.
Right.
It means that then that was the right idea. But things can change. J.K. Dobbins, and 2019 was kind of a bloodbath for rookie running backs, but in 2020, it wasn't as bad, or it wasn't as bad if you were patient. And J.K. Dobbins, as we hoped, as the year went on, did emerge as the closest thing this team is going to have a lead back. Gus Edwards is still very good, probably coming back. He's a restricted free agent, and then we'll see. But look, I was looking at CBS Sports did early rankings. I haven't done early rankings yet. I need to do them. Like, they put out their top 12 running backs for next year. Dave Richard, Chris Towers, and Heath Cummings.
Yeah.
These teamed Heath Cummings. And none of them had Dobbins in their top 12. Not one of them. Is J.K. Dobbins just screaming value right now? Or is it just a consequence of how deep running back is? But either way, that seemed notable to me.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing. To me, Dobbins is easily one of the most talented running backs already in the league. I mean, he was he was unbelievable this season. I mean, this is not really a predictive metric, but I like looking at it because it's fun from a descriptive standpoint. But if you look at the yards per carry for J.K. Dobbins versus his teammates' yards per carry, and I do that throughout the league and look at a player's yards per carry versus teammates' yards per carry, he was top 5 in the league within that metric. Which is good to see. The fear, I think, and probably the main reason why people will be lower on him than expected is more so environment driven. Obviously, the environment itself is going to allow for probably a little bit of inflation from an efficiency standpoint on the ground. But I mean, the last 2 years, not only has Baltimore not been pass friendly, of course, because they're not throwing the ball that much, but they're not throwing that much to running backs. I mean, they were 25th in target share this season at the running back position, 29th last season. And so if you're looking at it from a PPR standpoint, really in general, because you always want targets for your running backs, that's the main fear with a guy like Dobbins. But yeah, I mean, I think that he's definitely going to be at least a safe option, right? Yeah. Early in drafts. I mean, he's definitely, I just fear that true like workhorse high-end RB1 outlook might not be there for Dobbins until things, tangibly change.
And at that point, he's a top 5 overall pick.
Yeah,
at that point, he's a cornerstone of your team. I guess all I'm really saying is, like, if I get, cute with it and start out my draft without a running back in the first 2 rounds, and I know that Dobbins is my running back one, I could take him in the 3rd round.
Yeah,
I mean, we might see guys like Miles Sanders fall to the 3rd round next year. Probably will, actually. So it'll be interesting. But Dobbins scored in the last 5 games, and he was splitting with Gus Edwards, but still was a consistent option. Marquise Brown became more consistent. His arrow is pointing up coming out of the season. Didn't look like he was going to be a success. Did he change your mind, or what was your thoughts coming into the season, going out of the season on Hollywood?
Yeah, look, I loved Hollywood entering the season. I just thought that the ceiling was there. I do question the truly high ceiling that he could bring to the table. I mean, not only look, I'm not like don't put me in BMI Twitter. I'm not part of BMI Twitter. And then
Devontae Smith's only 175 pounds.
Right. Like I don't need that, but I do think that with Marquise Brown's game. In particular, I don't think that he's like a Devontae Smith. I don't think it's the same type of scenario situation that we're looking at from a comp perspective. I think with Marquise Brown, and we've thought this, it's more of like a Deshaun Jackson type situation. And what we've seen historically with a guy like Djax is that he hasn't necessarily had these like blow up true, consistent wide receiver one seasons, but we know that especially in a best ball format where you don't have to predict those big plays, we know that that's a little bit more attractive in general. The thing with Hollywood this year is that throughout the first half of the season, I'm sitting there in my 15 transactions column saying, just buy Hollywood Brown right now. All the peripherals are there. He's top 20 in air yards. He was seeing deep targets. They just weren't converting at all. Part of that was because of Lamar Jackson. But to start the season, Hollywood Brown had one of the worst conversion rates on deep passes in the NFL. And then down the stretch, again, maybe some of that had to do with schedule, maybe. But at the same time, that was just natural. It was going to hit at some point, right? Natural regression was going to hit because Hollywood Brown is a good player. So I still think he's solid, but just given this offense, the offense in general, you can, again, like I said with J.K. Dobbins, there's going to be some sort of downfall, some sort of negative because of the lack of target share. And with Brown too, down the stretch, he saw a really high target share. I mean, he was in like the 35% range. And to sustain that, we can't bet on. So because of that, it's a little bit scary because they're not going to be a very pass friendly offense, but it's like a wide receiver 3. If you can get them in that range, I mean, it's fine. That's the kind of player you want in that wide receiver 3 spot.
And what didn't come this year was the deep target. Well, not the deep targets, the deep catches.
Right.
A lot of empty air yards, but then it didn't matter because he was catching touchdowns and getting open, using that quickness to get open in the short area. And maybe Lamar Jackson's just never going to be a good passer to the sidelines deep. It's just not going to be what he does. But he usually is a very good passer to the middle of the field where Mark Andrews does his damage. Going into the year, JJ, and I've been keeping these around 30 minutes, but we're talky this morning, which is good because there's a lot to go over here. Mark Andrews, going into the season, we thought, ooh, Hayden Hurst, Falcon. Mark Andrews, no, he's the same guy. He was the same guy. So with that in mind, is Andrews going to be somebody that we feel like is not going to ascend past his current level, and we're going to either look at Waller or Kelsey or just throw darts and see what we can do because most people are in that situation anyway?
Yeah, so traditionally that's been the way to do things. Like you and I have had plenty of debates, I'm sure, about early tight end and whatnot. And then this year, obviously, that was a way good way of going about things if you ended up getting Travis Kelsey. And so obviously next year now Kelsey's going to be a first rounder. And going with Kittle is going to make a lot of sense. And the opportunity cost in the early rounds is shifting a little bit because the wide receiver position's just gotten a little bit flatter. So it's a little bit easier, to spend up at the position. But what we're seeing is, I don't want to throw Mark Andrews into the middle round tight end grouping that we used to see, back in, 5 to 6 years ago, where like Greg Olsen was constantly being drafted in that area. Because Mark Andrews brings more to the table than a guy like Greg Olsen did, where Greg Olsen, you were drafting for a floor, not so much a ceiling. Mark Andrews still has that ceiling. It's kind of interesting. I feel like he was overshadowed this year by the monster Kelsey and Waller performances that we saw, because realistically, Andrews coming out of last year, everyone's like, oh, this guy's amazing, he's so good, yada yada yada, which he is. But then he comes out this past year, his numbers weren't dramatically worse than they were last season, and that's with the Lamar Jackson regression. And we should have expected that. We shouldn't have expected Mark Andrews to necessarily score 10 touchdowns again this year. And so I actually thought that he was fairly impressive given the circumstances. And I'm not really knocking him down per se, but I think that my general feeling towards it is that he sort of created this new tier that we haven't really seen in the past, where, maybe Zach Ertz was kind of in it for a little while, but I think that he's in this tier where he's clearly not Kelsey Kittle, right? And probably not Waller either. But he's better than what the traditional middle round tight ends have been, and he has more upside than that. So I'm still on the Andrews train.
Looking ahead, Baltimore's going to have to make decisions on Yannick Ngakoue and Matt Judon and free agency. Willie Snead, too, Devin Duvernay. Remember that name. Even though, again, volume, the structure of the Ravens offense makes it hard to have those weekly overachievers. Okay, we turn the page to Cincinnati. Joe Burrow. We could totally do a glass half empty, glass half full thing on Burrow, right? Because for fantasy, except when he played the Browns, he was actually not very impressive at all. And you saw the limitations of his arm. You saw the limitations of what he can do behind that offensive line until we couldn't watch him at all mostly because of the offensive line, right? So what do we think about Burrow? I mean, certainly from a late round quarterback perspective, he was a favorite in 2019, didn't really come through, but he'll be dirt cheap. 2020, I'm sorry, and he'll be dirt cheap in 2021. When you look back on Burrow's rookie year, what stands out?
Yeah, so he was one of two guys that I like targeting late this past year. Burrow and Tannehill were my two late round go-tos because they did have that mobility, and they could get some points with their legs, which Burrow showed off a little bit at times, which is good to see. But the low 3.2% touchdown rate, that's not going to cut it in fantasy. Touchdown rate is one of the biggest things that's going to drive fantasy production at the quarterback position. But it was, the positives from an environment perspective was that the Zach Taylor offense and the Zach Taylor team the last 2 years, they've been so unbelievably pass heavy to honestly a shocking degree. Last season when they were so bad, the crazy thing was their pass rate was actually higher in neutral game scripts than it was overall, which is you don't usually see that from such a bad team. And then that obviously translated this year. They were throwing the ball a lot. One of the big things with Burrow that I think is a concern is his deep ball passing. We didn't see that convert very much at all. Part of that was definitely an AJ Green problem, where Green had historically bad deep ball numbers this past year, but he was fourth worst in deep ball completion percentage. I'm looking at 15 plus air yard throws instead of 20 plus air yard throws there. So even intermediate to deep ball passes, they just weren't really there. Maybe, that was a product of the combination of a poor offensive line and him being a rookie, but is definitely something, to watch moving forward, because we didn't see that necessarily as strongly from a Justin Herbert. So, I think that it was a to be expected type rookie year from Burrow. And the reason why I'm still, still more optimistic than pessimistic with him from a fantasy perspective is because I do think he brings that athleticism to the position.
Yeah, I hope that things go better. I hope that he has a better environment to operate in. We'll see what they do to reinforce the offensive line. We were excited about their running game, or at least the receiving part of the running game. We'll talk about Joe Mixon. Another one, and Jamie Eisenberg, I forgot to mention, there's 4 of the CBS sports analysts giving their early top 12s. No Joe Mixon in anyone's top 12. So again, we're looking at the third round. Joe Mixon's going to be there for you. Going into the season, we thought Joe Burrow offense is going to be better. Maybe Zach Taylor can do more of the things that they did with Todd Gurley with the Rams as a receiver. We know Mixon is a good receiver. For some reason, they refuse to really do that. He did take a step forward as a receiver.
Yes.
And just like Burrow, though, and the funny thing is, if you look at Mixon's average for the 6 games he played before, and remember, I'll always remember, JJ, he went back into the game with that foot injury, and then we never saw him again. He had one massive game against Jacksonville, and otherwise, his numbers, at some point, I guess it's like banging your head against the desk where it's like, if we keep saying Joe Mixon is better than his numbers, at what point is it clearly not true? If we have to say it over and over and over again. But I know if I see him in there in the third round, again, I'm looking at these running back rankings, JJ, and I'm thinking I might be able to skip running back in the first 2 rounds if I can get Joe Mixon in the third. Or is that a sucker bet at this point after how many years we've had him not live up to expectations?
I don't think it's a sucker bet at all. I mean, look, if you look at what he did entering last year, the way people talk about Mixon, it's as if he's never finished as a low end RB1. I mean, he's given us production. It's not like he's done absolutely nothing, and we're just saying it's based on hype and where he was drafted and etc. And then, like you noted, I feel like there's a lot of anchoring bias going on with Mixon because he started the season off not looking great. Seeding work to Giovanni Bernard as a receiver. But if you look at what he did from a target share perspective, and again, this is in an offense that throws the ball a lot at one of the highest rates in the league. So if you have, a decent target share in that offense, you're then going to see a lot more targets in overall volume. We're not talking about the Baltimore offense we just talked about. So with Mixon, if you prorate his target share, it was 12.6%, which is a fairly good target share. That's the same. That's basically what we saw to Miles Sanders when he was healthy this year. So you're then taking that and you're putting in an offense that's going to be pass heavy, and an offense that's likely going to lose AJ Green. And we don't know what the pass catchers are really going to look like. To me, he's probably going to be a value next year. I think he's a good buy candidate, both in redraft and in dynasty, because he did get that contract, so you can feel a little bit more comfortable. I don't like taking on older running backs, don't get me wrong, but of the older running backs to choose from, you might be able to get a discount because of the way people are viewing him after this season.
And I love that you called him an older running back. He's 24.
Yeah, I know.
No, but it's because he came into the league young, and because the new crop, this year's crop of draft running backs isn't quite what we've had the last 2 years, but there's still going to be players that take jobs and push players down the depth chart. But you're right, he's got that stability around him, and that's exciting. Last guy I will touch on, T. Higgins.
Yeah.
Does he deserve a lot more love than he's getting? Trick question, right? Because he does. I mean, is this a guy that's going to come out and start to take those leaps, like the Calvin Ridley leap? Maybe not. I mean, Michael Thomas got to the top of Mount Everest, but what I'm saying? Like, T. Higgins produced. He produced through bad quarterback play. He produced through a team that was really going nowhere. What could he do if this team is going somewhere next year?
Yeah, so you ever do rookie drafts and you just have a guy that you keep drafting, but you didn't know that you were high on him, and then all of a sudden, and then it works out for you, and so that was T. Higgins for me. Chase Claypool was the opposite for me. So I got so don't get me wrong, I don't get everything, but T. Higgins was that dude for me this year. And he ended up being a stud. Like, I think he's a stud. If one of the things I like to look at, especially, I mean, with everything I already mentioned, how I compare running backs and look at their yards per carry versus their teammates' yards per carry. But you can do the same thing by looking at wide receivers in their environment and see how they were used. And T. Higgins was the best wide receiver for that team at every single level. He was the guy who, I mean, you can see him winning contested catches down the field, which is not, I mean, maybe he looked a little bit better because AJ Green was his biggest comparison and he was just so horrendous. But at the same time, the numbers definitely show that he was by far their best deep target this year. He was playing in the slot a little bit too. He played well there. He ended up, I mean, look, volume is a skill statistic with wide receivers. I mean, even with running backs to a degree, because you got to be talented to see the field. But you got to be, you got to get open. And he had 108 targets. He had a 19% target share. Those are two numbers that you love to see at the wide receiver position. And those are two numbers that are going to be predictive for a good career. So I'm very, very high on T. Higgins.
Yeah, in a year that we didn't have someone like Justin Jefferson, he would have really stolen more headlines. Yeah. And I don't remember the exact cutoff, but like 5,700 and something like 6 touchdowns or 5 touchdowns. There's been a number, a magic threshold where if somebody does that as a rookie, as a wide receiver, their chances of taking off go way up. And he would have been 1,000-yard receiver, or at least had a chance to be 1,000-yard receiver if he hadn't gotten hurt in the last game. So that's fun. And other little housekeeping things here. CJ Uzomah looked interesting.
He did
before he got hurt. So, there's the chance there. Tyler Boyd, let's call him Keenan Allen light. I mean, he could be Keenan Allen light going forward. He had some 11 catch games. They have to do something about the offensive line. They got a lot of players that are entering free agency. Carl Lawson, William Jackson, Sean Williams, Mackenzie Alexander. So, we'll see what Cincinnati does, but we know they're going to keep Zach Taylor, and looks like Joe Burrow is going to be throwing by February. So praise for that, because we want to see an NFL with all the best players playing. We didn't get to see an NFL with much Odell Beckham this year. Strangely, JJ, it actually made Baker Mayfield got better. So Cleveland, I guess there's not a lot to talk about when we look back at the Cleveland season in review. Nick Chubb is Nick Chubb.
Right.
He's the man. And I get the idea. It was similar going into this year of taking him. He did indeed, let me say this. He did indeed benefit from this offense because he was better on a points per game basis this year than he was in 2019, even though half of the season in 2019, he wasn't sharing with Kareem Hunt.
Yep.
And he improved in this offense, improved for fantasy. And if you spend your late first round pick, early second round pick on Nick Chubb, then I get it. I totally get it. He's basically Derrick Henry without the volume, watching him play. And Kareem Hunt's not going to fall to the 5th or 6th round this year.
Right.
Or maybe he will, though, because of what we keep talking about, how deep running back is deep. What's going on? But Baker, it's just quarterback. He's not a runner. We're not going to be interested in him. Austin Hooper's coming on a little bit. I guess the interesting question, JJ, might be that if Odell Beckham now falls even farther, because we would have had this conversation 5-6 months ago. Wow, Odell Beckham, a 3rd round pick. I even got him in the 4th round in a few drafts. And the production before he got hurt, you weren't excited. You weren't running around saying, I knew it. What if Odell falls to the 5th round, the 6th round? Are we interested?
I mean, maybe around the 6th. That's usually when opportunity cost really starts to drop, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore.
Is all that matters.
Yeah. So why not go after him? I think what's most interesting though is the way people view Jarvis Landry in fantasy still. And to me, there's a tangible thing that you can point to as to why Jarvis Landry didn't really perform to start the year, and it was that hip injury, right? That he was dealing with all offseason, and he talked about it pretty openly too at times. So I think that when that started to heal a little bit, it was after those trio of bad weather games that Cleveland had, where things really started to turn around for Landry, and he ended up having a really strong season. And don't forget, he was really good last year when Odell Beckham was healthy. So I'm not really worried about what that dynamic is going to do to Landry. So I think Landry is probably going to be another guy who's just sort of undervalued this year, from a redraft perspective. And then if OBJ drops, sure, throw that dart. But at this point, it's just kind of like maybe I don't know how, but maybe this is just what it is with OBJ and this Baker connection.
Well, you wonder if Mayfield's attention and focus was drawn to Beckham because it's Beckham. And then without Beckham out there, he could just perform within the structure of the plays, and the plays worked. Jarvis Landry's Hines Ward. And I say that I only have one Steelers jersey. It's a Hines Ward jersey. So it's awesome. It's awesome. I'll be rooting. Kansas City had their moment. I'll be rooting for Cleveland along with all the Browns fans out there. And again, Austin Hooper came on a little bit, do some with David Njoku. Looking at this team, you got to be really excited to be a Browns fan, because it looks like it's only going to get better. Only Olivier Vernon, really a significant free agent here. Also, Donovan Peoples-Jones made a little splash here in his rookie year, showing the quarterback play at Michigan probably was holding him back. So he looks like a nice piece. Rashard Higgins is going to hit free agency. And good luck. Congratulations, Cleveland. And I said this as we turn the page now to this final team in the AFC North. I said this, JJ, because I was conflicted at the beginning of the Steelers-Browns game. I was conflicted because, as I made the analogy with Cecil in the recap show, it's like in A Christmas Story when Ralphie finally gets on top of the bully, like take that, and that I've always rooted for the underdog. There was a time in America I thought that it was like an American thing to root for the underdog, like when Rocky was a big movie and everything.
Right.
So part of me was actually kind of pleased to see the Browns, get their moment.
Right.
But Steelers are still tattooed on my soul. And I just want to say again, when Mike Tomlin punted on 4th and 1 at 50, it made me regret for a second decades of Steeler fandom. Like, I have been a fan of this team. I've been invested in this team for decades. For it to all build to this. But you have anything you want to get off your chest? Because I'm just doing this is our Yinzer therapy session.
Yeah. So look, my fandom, and I'm sure yours has too, has definitely shifted and changed through the years. You do this for a living, and you start to appreciate other teams a lot more. You don't have the same hatred that you did about, when I was 19 years old, I hated everything about Cleveland, right? Like that's just how it is. You grow up in Pittsburgh, you're supposed to just hate Cleveland. But when Cleveland won that game, I mean, I basically approach the Steelers at this point. Call me a bandwagon fan, that's fine. I don't get down when they lose, but I enjoy when they win. That's my general way of and my general outlook with the Steelers. So yeah, I mean, like when they, people will hit me up on Twitter and like start talking smack. I'm like, that's not me. I don't do that. I don't need that. And yeah, to your point, I mean, it was kind of cool to see, of all teams to really do this and to really finish off this era of Pittsburgh Steelers football, which was a continuous underachievement. It felt like. It was good to see. It was cool to see that it was like the little brother doing it and beating the Steelers and doing it the way that they did too, which was the traditional smash math way of playing football, right? And so it was impressive. The whole Browns performance was unbelievably impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that they didn't get a single the Steelers didn't have a single quarterback hit on Baker Mayfield in that game, and with this makeshift offensive line, regardless of Bud Dupree and his impact, and him being out, and how the pass rush changed, which I feel like was something that nationally didn't get enough attention, that the amount of injuries that the Steelers defense sustained and how they weren't, what they were the first 4 weeks of the season. Despite all that, it was just really impressive to see what Cleveland did.
It was. And it always comes back to Pitt. Alex Van Pelt, baby. Because I think the Steelers blitzed like 53% of the time or something ridiculous in the game. And like you said, no quarterback hits because they made the adjustment to quick passing. Mm-hmm. And it was an embarrassment. So I guess, how do we even talk? I mean, we look back at the Steelers season for fantasy, and, Deontay Johnson he made another step forward within the context of this offense.
It's weird. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, because of the way the offense was. Juju is gone, and he was not even really running routes, like NFL receiver routes, for a lot of the year. I don't even know what to say about Juju entering free agency. We'll see where he ends up. Watch the Jets. It just feels like Jets. It feels like a Jets signing, right?
It does, especially if they keep Darnold around.
I don't know. Eric Ebron was Eric Ebron, 5-6 times showing us like why it's terrifying when the ball's in the air if he's on your team and it's going to him. But again, fit in this offense. James Conner's not even going to get Leonard Fournette's contract, right? I mean, he'll be lucky to get 1 year, $2 million from somebody, which means he might be back with the Steelers. Not that we should want him. It's kind of bleak, right? I mean, even if Roethlisberger's back, it's not going to get better. I know Randy Fichtner's gone, but I don't even know how to project, because JJ in 2019 without Roethlisberger, it was the worst offense in the league. I think even the 2020 Patriots offense was looking at the 2019 Steelers offense and saying, man, that's bad. You guys ought to pick it up the game a little bit. So looking forward, I don't know that I'm projecting growth for any Steeler. And I wonder if the market, even old Chase Claypool, I wonder if the market is going to understand that and maybe overcompensate for that, or everyone's going to have to learn the hard way. You're going to try to cheer me up here?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the bottom line offensively, it's easy to blame Roethlisberger, and I think he's to blame for sure for a lot of the issues that they had on offense this year. But I mean, the offensive line, man, it was so bad, just so bad. And if you look at Roethlisberger's numbers with a clean pocket in 2018, which was when he was healthy, and then 2020 weren't dramatically different. His efficiency numbers and so on. And we saw vintage Ben at times this year. The Colts game in the second half, that was vintage Ben. Even in the second half of the Browns game, Ben looked like a different quarterback, right? Part of the problem, though, is that Randy Fichtner really changed this offense to make up for the deficiencies of the offensive line. And that resulted in this Deontay Johnson playing like this weird running back type role for them, right? Like that's what he was for this offense, where he would run these negative A dot routes and get all and pile up these receptions and do his thing. And look, I think Deontay Johnson's a really good route runner and a really good player. I mean, he can get open on anyone. But it's just it was a really, really annoying and interesting way to run an offense and honestly run an offense into the ground. I mean, you're not going to win in the NFL by doing what they did. So I'm less concerned about Roethlisberger. I'm more concerned about the offensive line and how they really move pieces around this offseason, because they need to revamp it entirely this offseason, not only because of contracts, but just because they played so poorly. So if they can fix the offensive line to a degree, and if Ben does end up coming back, I don't think, again, my bottom line here is I don't think that this is just a Ben Roethlisberger problem from like a headline perspective, right? Like that's the way that I think a lot of people are talking about it. But I saw plenty of signs that he wasn't so completely deteriorated. I mean, he made some really questionable plays, but I think part of that is that he's trying to do too much. And don't forget, the 4 or 5 years prior to this year, the Steelers had one of the best offensive lines in football, and that's what really helped Ben and helped elevate them and be able to throw the ball down the field more and do more offensively. And so if they can fix that, it's going to really, it's going to have a dramatic effect on the offense. But again, I'm not putting too much on Ben. Maybe he retires. 3 weeks ago he said he wasn't. So I don't know how much we can confidently say that he will. And then I think the real big, and I tweeted about this yesterday, but I think there's going to be a big sort of battle and debate between Claypool or Deontay, whether you're looking at it from a redraft or dynasty perspective. And to me, to your point, Deontay Johnson in the way that he was used this year, a lot of people are going to see that as a negative in a way. But I still see it as they're getting their good player. They're getting the ball to a good player, right? That's what it comes down to. But at the same time, I still, what I tweeted yesterday was I still think Claypool has this massive, massive ceiling in the league, which I didn't see coming at all. I mean, I was not a Claypool guy, after the draft. I didn't, but look, the best sort of like high level comparison. I was messaging our buddy Rich Rebar about this because I'm definitely on the Claypool train right now. Feels a little bit like the way people felt about DK Metcalf after last year, right? Where you have this physical freak who showed signs throughout his rookie season. The difference is that it was very easy to buy into DK Metcalf because of his situation and being tied to Russell Wilson. Right. Whereas you're not having that backbone for a guy like Claypool. So it'll be interesting to see what they do from a quarterback perspective. But I do think that Claypool has a very high ceiling in this league.
Yes, and I am happy to admit I was wrong, because the main thing with Claypool was he was winning at Notre Dame on these immense physical advantages, which I'm always wary of those players because the advantages become much smaller in the NFL. Right. And then you watch him against NFL players, and it looks like the same advantage.
Right.
He looks just as physically superior to NFL cornerbacks as he did against guys playing Notre Dame. He has a lot of room to improve with the way he catches the ball, the way he plays the ball in the air. He looks very raw at those moments. Whereas Deontay Johnson on the 39-yard touchdown against the Colts that really kicked things off in the second half, he made a perfect play on the ball in the air.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, Deontay Johnson is a highly skilled player. I just hate how much he got banged up this year. What's going to be sad, and with Roethlisberger, I think you're right to not be too hard on him. But what we saw this year is, for the first time in his career, JJ, I saw a quarterback who was afraid of getting hit.
Oh, for sure.
Saw a quarterback that was shying away from contact, anticipating contact, and he used to be a guy that would make throws with guys hanging off of him.
Yeah, right.
He's not that guy anymore.
Right.
And because of this finesse offensive line, they did not renew the contract with Sean Sarrett. So we'll see what happens there. And what's really going to be interesting to read the tea leaves is who they hire as an offensive coordinator. Mike Tomlin sounded frustrated. And I feel like Mike Tomlin, in the best interest of the franchise, probably needs to bring in some strong personalities. I didn't love the Keith Butlers coming back, but whatever. That he delegates to and lets them run the show. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like we're at this crossroads with Mike Tomlin right now that was very, very similar to John Harbaugh like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, right? Right, where it was the Ravens were going in the wrong direction, and what he did, he chose the path of being a little bit more progressive with the way that he views his football team and opening things up and allowing, just the way he views analytics now is a lot different. And then obviously, they're fourth down, which is exactly what a guy like Mike Tomlin would need. I mean, him and Mike Vrabel made some of the worst decisions. I mean, there was a chart of the most like cowardly
the surrender index. Yeah.
And each Mike Vrabel and Mike Tomlin both were the only coaches in the top 10 twice when it comes to that. So I mean, I think that Tomlin needs to open his mind a little bit. And to your point, if you do get a little bit more personality there and not guys who are just yes men, which feels like it's been the case for a while in Pittsburgh, maybe that helps things a little bit. The problem is that if you do keep Roethlisberger around, that might not fly with a guy like Roethlisberger. That was the problem with Bruce Arians with Roethlisberger, right? Is that he had that personality, and Ben likes to control things, and Todd Haley too, right? And so that's the fear. I just don't know if this team right now is just meshing properly.
Yeah, well, look, it sounds harsh, but they can't really move forward into the future as long as Ben Roethlisberger is the quarterback.
Yeah,
and it's going to be painful because, as my Sigmund Bloom, my 84-year-old father, has been asking me for like 4 years, what are they going to do about quarterback? What are they going to do about quarterback? When are they going to make a plan for the quarterback after Roethlisberger? And I'm going to take to my grave that they took Terrell Edmonds over Lamar Jackson. Oh. And why did people, and what was the reason? What was the number one reason people would cite when you say, well, maybe the Steelers could take a Lamar Jackson? Ben won't have that. Ben Roethlisberger won't be on board. And I've been saying this because I feel like I want to eat my words. Like I like when the universe shows me how wrong I was, not just when it benefits my team, but that Jordan Love draft pick, which I eviscerated when they made it. I look back now and I'm thinking, actually, isn't that what I wish the Steelers would have done? I mean, whether you're right about the quarterback or not, that you take the next quarterback when your starter's like 36, not when they're 40. You know?
Yeah.
And look what the dividends they got from how Aaron Rodgers took it. So if they would have been afraid to take Jordan Love, because what will Aaron think? What did Aaron think? I've got to go back and be the best I've been in my whole life to show them that I'm still really good and still a guy that's the master of my destiny. Roethlisberger, I think he ran out of gas too. I mean, I think there's just a certain thing we forget. We saw it happen with Breeze this year. We saw it happen not so much with Rivers in terms of his play, but his foot fell apart. You know, Breeze had 11 broken ribs. Roethlisberger was playing through two messed up knees that I'm sure was affecting him in the second half of the year. And then because it's a Roethlisberger team, as his battery got low, the team's battery got low.
Right.
And I have no idea what they're going to do. They're probably going to give Mason Rudolph a chance. Right? I mean, that's just reading this team and how they are. And then
I agree. See. Yeah. I mean, they have this like unconditional love for Mason Rudolph, and it's shocking. It just doesn't make any sense.
He looks the part. It's just because he has like a nice chin and he's big and he's handsome-ish.
How wild is it that his doppelganger really is Sidney Crosby? Have you ever noticed that?
That's true. They
look very much alike. Maybe there's a little connection there, and they feel the need to push.
This is going to turn into total Yinzer therapy too, because I talk to my dad frequently, and he's like, I said this, and I think you'll appreciate it too. When we were talking at the end of the Cleveland game, he said, "Well, I'm 84. At least you'll have a chance to live long enough to see this team be good again." And then he said, the Pirates, they maybe will win 40 games. They had one good player come up at the end of the year, Hayes. They're probably going to have to trade him now because that's what they do. And the Penguins, now they don't even have a goalie. You know, the Penguins, we can look at the Fleury Murray decision and like everything went spiral. I mean, I guess they won the cup with Murray, but you get it. So this is our Yinzer therapy session. And it's good, but the Steelers, one of the most difficult teams to project for next year right now, as there's a lot of question marks.
The other thing too that I want to add about the Steelers is that this is actually a pretty good example, I think, of why it's really, really hard to team build at the NFL level around a defense. Because it's not a very sustainable way of doing things, and if you're not grabbing the truly important offensive positions, whether you're looking at line, wide out. I mean, they've obviously done a good job drafting wideouts, but if you're not addressing quarterback, and then obviously, I mean, they're going to have problems defensively. By the time, you know, this defense runs out, that's when the offense will hypothetically maybe turn the corner and be better again. But they're not going to match, and that's the real problem I think the Steelers are going to have.
Yeah, it's a problem with a franchise being visionary, and JJ, we're relying on, I guess, the Steelers way at this point. You know, the Steelers way that everybody buys in, and everybody's very professional. Yeah. But in the NFL now, it was real interesting hearing Urban Meyer this morning talking about new head coach of the Jags, that one of the biggest adjustments going from college to the pros is that you look at the other sideline and they've got the same thing you've got, or maybe even better than what you've got.
Right.
Which I thought was Meyer, and I know he was good at Bowling Green, he was good at Utah, I get it, he's a good coach, but he's admitting when you're at Ohio State, when you're at Alabama, when you're at these big programs, Clemson, well, it's fun and kind of easy because you have better players. And the NFL, that really isn't a thing that you often have. Right. And what it means is you have to outcoach the other side. You have to be clever, you know? You have to anticipate. And when has a Steelers team that, even honestly under Bill Cowher, like out-coached the opponent? Like when they won, you said it was because we had better plans, because we had better. It's just not a Steelers way.
It's my entire adult life, it's never happened. They've only won based on personnel. That's it. That's the only way they've won, is when they had these like loaded rosters, and they were able to do it that way. I mean, and just look at the way they defend like slot receivers every week, right? And the way that they do the same thing every week, and it gets overshadowed by the fact that like they've had guys in the past and these great talent, because they've been able to gather great talent, right? Yeah. And they've had these guys that have been able to push that aside. Oh, look at TJ Watt, he's doing this, and look at James Harrison back in the day, he's doing this, and so on. But you know, you can't do that whenever those players run out.
Yeah, and I mean to give credit to the organization, some of that talent advantage is because they develop players well. I think there is something. Yeah. There was a running back, Chad Spann. I don't know if you remember him. He and Matt Waldman worked a lot together, and he mentioned how all the different organizations he was with, when he showed up to the Steelers, it was different. You just feel it was different. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're relying on to be a bridge to the next era, whatever that era brings, but not a forward-looking, innovative team, and not a team that is going to very willingly leave the old ways behind and embrace the new ways. State of the Steelers, 2021. But real quick, state of football, 20. Anybody you're pulling for? Any your heart still in the playoffs at all with 8 teams left?
Probably Buffalo. I think it's easy, right? I mean,
cousins. We're like Buffalo and Pittsburgh are like cousins, and Pittsburgh and Cleveland are like cousins, but we don't claim each other.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot easier to root for Buffalo. I mean, and like Josh Allen, again, I feel similarly as you do when I get calls wrong. I mean, I wasn't very high on him coming out, and I mean, he's made It's always fun to see guys make these like historically outlier, insane steps in progression with their careers. It's really difficult to root against that. Really difficult to root against like a Stephon Diggs and John Brown and that offense. Just so much fun. Buffalo would be my team this year.
Yeah, it would be a lot of fun. And there's a great article, by the way, folks out there. Robert Mays wrote a really terrific article about Brian Daboll and what Brian Daboll has learned over the years after coming up as a Belichick disciple. And it was really interesting. Apropos to the conversation we were having, and they got guys like Derek Anderson and Patrick DeMarco on the record talking about this stuff, where when Derek Anderson was under Eric Mangini and Daboll was the offensive coordinator in 2009, he came in and he said, "You've got to memorize all of these formations, and I want you. He said something like throwing a ball against the wall. Like he pictured how it was they did it with Brady, right? Like name next one, name this one, boom, boom. It's like, well, maybe that's how Tom is, but that's not how I am. Then take it 9 years forward to when Allen gets hurt and Derek Anderson's playing in 2018 for the Bills and Daboll's the offensive coordinator. And Anderson says, here's some things that have worked when I've been a quarterback at different stops in the past. Daboll's like, interesting. I want to hear about them. Let's see if we can do something with this. And I think it's a sign that it's the flexibility. Yeah. It's the evolution. He used the word collaboration. He's going to be the Chargers head coach. He should use these words to show how he's grown, where I think the Belichick disciples come out and they think it's about authority, rigidity, program. And he talked about empathy and compassion with the players. So when you hear about those values, even like, Doug Peterson, even though it didn't end great, I feel like that was the 2018 Eagles, whatever, they talked about love and they talked about these values that really the team rallied around each other. And I think the Bills have that. And we have that every time we get together, JJ. We in the fantasy community have that. And it's great. Fair. And we've gone a little over time, but you knew it was going to happen with our Yinzer therapy session. JJ late round quarterback, FanDuel and Number Fire. We're going to come back at you next week with the NFC. Lots of your favorite names out there, folks. Enjoyed the playoff football. We'll have a lot to talk about. By the way, stick around. Cecil and I are going to preview the divisional games here in a few minutes. Thanks, everyone, for showing out. And always thanks for being so classy.